started. Everyone, thanks for being here. My name is Melissa Nixon, and I do communications and marketing here at North. This is the first President's Leadership Meeting of Fall 2018. We're really excited. We've got a great group of panelists, great speakers, and we're going to have plenty of time for questions and answers at the very end. Unfortunately, our trusted leader, President Warren Brown, had to be out of town for a family event. So he actually taped an introduction that I'm going to play right now. So, 1 second.
Let's see it.
Good afternoon, students and colleagues. I want to welcome you to the first President's Leadership Series for 2018. I began this series 4 years ago as a way to increase professional development opportunities for all college employees. I'm sorry I'm not able to join you today since I'm out of state for a family event. Today's learning goal is to understand what rights and responsibilities employees and students have in First Amendment situations. We also want to provide some practical and legal guidelines to aid in creating an inclusive learning environment for all. Free speech issues have taken center stage at campuses across the nation recently. Schools like Berkeley and Middlebury, and even Washington schools like Green River and recently Clark College have attracted headlines over what's protected when it comes to public demonstrations and protected speech. It seems we have reached a crossroad in our society where protected free speech gets confused with unprotected speech, where people's good intent becomes interpreted as bad intent, where people don't understand or they don't care to understand the impact of their words, where certain isolated communication events turn into larger system-wide perceptions of a lack of personal safety, where hateful words were once anonymously posted on bathroom walls and distributed in flyers to now in your face with social media accounts that seem to thrive on venting hatred. To help us understand how we've arrived at this point and what can we do here at North, we've convened an excellent panel that includes representation from faculty, staff, and students. I want to personally thank these panelists. They were pulled in quickly to help because of their individual expertise and experiences are critical to helping us understand this topic. Although this discussion is occurring prior to the election, it really isn't about the election. Of course, there are rising levels of anxiety around and after elections, and because of that, our rhetoric can become more divided. But the lessons we learn today won't just help us now, they will help us as we engage with others on and off campus when free speech turns into hate speech. My academic background is in curriculum and instruction, and as such, I believe strongly in the concept of zone of proximal development, which means that learning must push the boundaries of what we don't know and what we think to be as true. However, as we push in this zone, we must respect the learning environment and not create disruptions that harm our learning environment. Such disruptions ultimately threaten our willingness to learn and also threaten our sense of on-campus safety. I want to thank you and members of our panel in engaging in this very important and timely topic. Thank you.
I'll say say, when Warren said that he was going to be out of town for this and could I facilitate, I was like, oh my gosh. But how easy was that? He just filmed an intro. I just get to stand up here and introduce people, so I've got it good. So our panelists, I'm going to just quickly say their names and titles, and then we'll go right into some questions and a presentation. In no particular order, we have Jill Lane, a political science faculty member.
No, not in no particular order. From best to...
Okay. We have Dr. Cristobal Borges, a history faculty member, and our student body president, Elijah Gerard. We have Derek Edwards, senior counsel in the Assistant Attorney General's office, and Peter Lortz, vice president of instruction. Pete, the best was saved for the middle. There you go. We have Joe Barrientos, vice president of student development services, Jeffrey Young, director of safety and security, and DeAndre Fisher, associate vice president of equity, diversity, and inclusion. Let's thank our panelists. Okay, so our first question is going to actually be directed at Jill and Cristobal, our faculty members. So Warren mentioned in his remarks the incidents at Berkeley, Middlebury, and Clark College. And so a question that we have, it sort of feels like colleges and universities have become the battleground for testing free speech and free speech limits. And it also feels we're at a crossroad where free speech and political speech sometimes collide with students and employees' need for an inclusive yet civil and safe learning environment. So a question that we have here is, help us understand how this happened. How did we get to this point? And what are some trends maybe that you're noticing nationally and here locally?
Okay. So there's no quick way of answering that question. I think putting on my historian hat, beyond just my hat as somebody who facilitates conversations that can get heated at times in a classroom, but as a historian, I do want to kind of bring a certain amount of breadth to this discussion. These are not new matters necessarily, right? I think that we're definitely in a different moment of this discussion. The realities of social media have turned this into a very different looking kind of discussion. But aspects of the university or the college and the educational space being a space where we negotiate and where we can test and where we have conflict, that is not new, right? Like that is something that has been around with us for a very long time, and we've negotiated it in many different ways. To a certain degree, I'm very much encouraged by that level of discourse in a university setting, in a college setting, in an educational setting. Because then that means that we have an opportunity for discussion. We have an opportunity for discourse. We have an opportunity to kind of take it to a place where we can analyze these things. I think the things that, and I guess this I'll veer a little bit away from your question, but I got the mic, so I'll go there. The thing that kind of worries me more is the aspect of the discussions that we are having that are outside of these settings and that are very much about stating something and then walking away from your responsibility of what you stated, right? And not then being able to have discussion because all you want to do is win that moment, win that argument, win that point. And that to me is more troublesome. And I see that at times in the classroom, and I think we'll kind of get into some of that as we move along. But that's where, for me, that question really resides. It's not so much what I've been seeing in my classes or on campus, is what I've been seeing and what people have been telling me of their realities in public spaces, in make-believe internet spaces, in a lot of other areas as well.
Thank you. This morning, because this is how recent this topic is, NPR reported on a poll that it and PBS did together, where 75% of Americans stated that they believe that political language will lead to violence. And Of those, 40% said that the President of the United States was the biggest instigator and separator and creator of other. What has happened is that there's a whole new field of study that's begun called stochastic terrorism. Basically, what this is the use of social media by a person or persons to demonize or otherize a group of people, knowing that statistically there is a probability of violence that will occur from it. And what is used most often so far, because this is a new term that's only 10 years old and one that's been popping up more in the past year or two, is the 2016 presidential speech by Mr. Trump, where he says, "I bet you Second Amendment followers can handle Mrs. Clinton." There was an inference there. So when violence occurs, it may seem random in nature, but there's actually linkage to the words that are used. It is sometimes very difficult in political science classes to discuss all these topics. They're very heavy, and we have people with all ideologies that are represented. I try to present in my classrooms all sides, the conservative and the liberal sides. We see now, and I think this is very interesting, last week the American Conservative, which is a conservative publication, put in one of their headlines that civil war is coming, it's the liberals' fault, and you better be ready. The Federalist last week went even further, outlining how the United States should be broken up into different countries. So the discussions we're having and the words we're using have become more important than ever. And when the leader of our country is setting a different tone and showing behavior to be okay and acceptable in a way that we haven't seen in modern history, it sets a different tone. And we have to be aware of it. In my course room, the first day we talk about respecting each other and allowing each other to talk. I have had instances where that has been a problem, but I have found full support here from the administration when it has been needed. And most times when I have been able to, or others have been able to explain why it is a problem, the students work on it, which is great.
Great. Thank you both very much. So that's a good segue, and folks who just joined us, welcome to the student experience, actually. So we've got our student body president on the panel, Elijah. Elijah, we've got a question for you. We're curious to know your experience as a student, and in particular, if you could share with us your experience with either well-managed or poorly managed First Amendment speech, and how has that contributed to either you and your fellow classmates feeling safe or unsafe?
How's this with the mic? Good? Alright. So it seems to me like we're having two conversations here. One is about what happens in our classrooms, holding space for learning or the interchange of different ideas. The second conversation pertains to what happens when outside actors come to our campus with the intent of spreading ideas, which may border on hate speech, if not be hate speech outright. There have been instances where in the free speech area, which is set aside in our courtyard, there have been people who have come, as protesters or what have you, who have made some students feel very unsafe. And if you are not a part of a group that has ever been targeted by hate speech, it's easy to underestimate the extent of trauma that creates just having that as like that hateful seed planted in the heart of this campus, which as part of its mission promises a highly supportive learning environment. For students from minority groups, students who are not white, students who are not straight or cisgender, we see the college tolerating that and kind of throwing up their hands and saying, well, we might get sued if we tell them that they have to leave. We have to hold space for free speech. it would look bad if we chased away everyone whose opinion was different from ours. But what it creates on our end is this sense of helplessness and this feeling like our voices don't matter, like our right to come here and feel safe and have an education is less important than the optics or the money, what happens if someone sues the college. So, of course, from the student end, we don't have a full grasp of all of the legal intricacies, but I do think it's extremely important that there be some sort of measures in place, because we do know that hate speech leads to violence, and it leads to trauma, and it leads to the emotional violence of like a student, coming here to learn and not being able to access their education because of like the violence that those words carry, and having that not only be prevalent in the media and prevalent in the whole world outside, but having that here on campus too, when we want to be, students first and foremost.
Thank you very much, Elijah. So this is a thorny issue. That's me editorializing, not going off a script here. And I was talking to one of the panelists, I think sometimes there is some gray area with free speech and First Amendment rights. So we're lucky because we have Derek Edwards, who is our counsel from the Assistant Attorney General's office. I'm going to call him up. We're going to do maybe 15 to 20 minutes, a presentation that Derek has, and then we will go back to our panelists and then open it up for Q&As. So panelists, if you don't want to sit front and center, feel free to move around. And Derek, come on up. Thank you.
So that's a hard act to follow, because obviously from my world, we're living within the laws and we don't want to get sued. Right now I'm in the federal court because this college is being sued by a preacher who claimed that when we removed him for being too loud, we violated his First Amendment rights. So that can be very expensive. And we had the Occupy Seattle movement at Seattle Central back in around 5 or 6 years ago, and we finally got passed a rule to ask them to leave because they were trashing the place, and we got sued over that. So, there's a process. And I'm going to talk first about the First Amendment and what are restrictions and what we can do. And then at the end, we're going to talk about how we can combat hate speech. We fight speech with speech, and we try to make people feel inclusive. And if you have an unpopular message, then stand up and say, no, we don't think that way. And even if you see postings on social media that are hateful, give it a dislike and post something contrary, and you'll bury it down in the bottom, because you are in the majority here, and it's important to remember that. And if students and minorities are feeling marginalized, then people need to step up for them and say, we support you. But we always fight speech with speech. And getting back to the political science, this is the marketplace of ideas, and that's what the courts have always said. You would come here, you're going to have conservative views, you're going to have liberal views, and we try to sort out through the chaff which one's going to work out the best for us. So you can go to the next. We have the First Amendment, and then we have our own Washington law against the Constitution too. You know, the text is different, and our courts have noted that as well. And we find that our First Amendment, the Washington Constitution, is more protective of speech than the First Amendment is in certain instances. And I'll talk about some of those things that our courts say you cannot do to prevent people from speaking. Go to the next one. So we got all sorts of speech, expressive ideas, pure speech, political speech, people talking, expressive speech, and symbolic speech. Back in the Vietnam War, a bunch of students came into the classroom wearing black armbands to protest the Vietnam War in Tinker. And they were booted and saying, you're disrupting the classroom. And they weren't doing anything but being very passive about it. And the court said that you don't abandon your First Amendment rights when you come to the schoolhouse gates. And the students won on that one. So people can wear a Trump shirt, they can wear a Make America Great Again hat. I've seen Make America Gay Again hats. So, you know, you can fight speech with speech, but you really can't bar people from expressing their opinions. You can't prevent somebody from speaking in a forum that's for people speaking. And you can't shout down people either with the heckler's veto. So if somebody's speaking and you don't like their message and you start yelling and shouting, you can probably be removed because you're trying to prevent somebody from getting their message across. Subsidizing speech is protected as well. We know the Hobby Lobby case, which was a Supreme Court case on campaign financing, but we also see it with S&A funds. So you may have a religious club here, which is they're engaged in First Amendment activities. They're entitled to be funded just like any other club, the political clubs. If there's a Republican Log Rollers Club, they get funding as well. Everybody gets treated the same. Viewpoint, subject matter, treat them all the same. And that's the key to the First Amendment. No subject matter or viewpoint discrimination when you open up a forum for people to speak. Anonymous speech is also protected, but there's ways to go ahead and protect it. We see sometimes a lot of these hate speech people put posters up in the middle of the night that are very hateful. That's anonymous speech, but they're putting it up in the wrong place. We have kiosks for putting things up. We have policies for posting things. And if people aren't following the rules, we take it down. Most people a lot of these guys are really chickens. You know, they don't want to be known. They don't want to be seen. They don't want their identities known because they're so unpopular and hateful. So there are ways to combat anonymous speech, although it's protected. So political and religious speech are the most protected, and courts will really scrutinize whether or not you're trying to discriminate against them if you're stopping somebody from trying to get a political or religious message across. We see far more religious cases than political cases because the religious organizations are so well funded. In fact, the preacher case we're dealing with right now, they have an attorney down in Tennessee who's taking it on for free, and he's claiming that because the preacher was preaching, and the preachers preach loudly, and we were told to calm down. Our rules say that you can't disrupt the classroom, and he wouldn't do it. He was removed, and he's saying that violated his First Amendment rights. So it's expensive, you know. I know that you say, well, go ahead and be sued, but we have to pay their attorney's fees, and it sometimes comes out of our own, the college's own local funds. So we really don't like to be sued. And if we do get sued, we like to win. So it's not a matter of public concern. Employee speech is different. So just because you have if you're an employee, you don't necessarily have the same rights that you would have out in the park to go ahead and say whatever you want to say. And there's a test. Under Garcetti, if you're speaking as an employee and not as a citizen, it's not protected. Under Connick Pickering, it depends on the disruption that's being caused by it. For faculty, you have academic freedom. The courts have said that if it's germane to the topic, you can talk about anything that's germane to the topic and you're protected. And that goes for students as well in the classroom. I mean, if it's germane, if it's on topic, students can talk about it as long as they're not disrupting class. But they don't have a right in a math class to start talking politics. It's not germane. So you can cut them off on that.
Are the cases you're referring to in here federal or state cases, or both?
These are all federal cases.
Okay.
So the First Amendment, if it violates the First Amendment, it certainly violates the state constitution too, because that's even a higher level. But Garcetti has been adopted by our courts as well. And there was a case called Deming out of the Washington State University where WSU tried to say, well, you don't have a First Amendment right because you're a faculty member. And even though you're complaining about the communications department being shut down, Garcetti says you were speaking as an employee and you're not protected. And the Ninth Circuit said, no. There's still academic freedom. And so you're protected as long as it's germane to the topic. Not much about corporate speech. We don't have to deal too much with that. We can go to the next one. And commercial speech, we get less protection as well. We don't allow commercial speech on campus under your rules because we don't want students to run the gauntlet of being people trying to sell them credit cards and things along that line. So that's actually prohibited under your First Amendment rules. And it's kind of tricky too. As you saw, Justice Brennan said, what is it? Be a patriot, buy American cars. Is that commercial speech or is it political speech? You know, so here is unprotected speech, and this is the kind of speech we can stop. Speech that promotes and a lot of these are kind of the same way of saying the same thing. Yelling fire in a crowded theater? No, can't do that. There was an incident up at Western Washington where somebody on Yik Yak said, let's lynch her. And that's inciting somebody to go ahead and take imminent action. And he was actually expelled from the university and I think prosecuted as well. So, you know, there are certain fighting words. That comes from Chapinski back in 1947, and he said, you're a damn socialist and a racketeer. I mean, okay, put up your dues. I don't think that would be fighting words nowadays, but I think we can think of some things that would be fighting words that might provoke somebody to fight, usually slurs. But there aren't any cases about it. Terrorist threats, obviously. Clear and present danger type things where they incite, getting back to the people that think that there's going to be a statistical chance that if I say something there will be violence that comes from it. Our courts haven't gone that far. It has to actually incite imminent danger. So so they're very cagey about it. They know it might do it, but it's protected. De minimis means negligible. So a student says, I want to sit in that seat over there, not over here. And the teacher wouldn't let me do it. He's retaliating against me because he wouldn't let me sit over there. And I said I wanted to sit over there. Well, that's not protected, obviously. And here is the one for colleges and schools. If the speech would cause a material and substantial disruption to the educational environment, and you have a rule that prohibits this, it's usually, like I said, if somebody's yelling and shouting and you can't put on a class, that's not protected and they can be asked to leave. It's what we call time, place, and manner restrictions on speech. Go to the next one. If it's a college's speech, then it's the college's speech and it's not somebody else's speech. It bears the imprimatur or mark of the college. It has their letterhead on it. Somebody sends out something on the college's letterhead. It looks like the college is talking. College publications. We have bulletin boards. You know, it depends. If it's the college's bulletin board, then it's the college's speech. If it's for other people to post things, then it may be actually kind of a limited forum. We've seen this with the university-issued transcripts that may have a notation on them, and even a thesis that a student at the University of California submitted, got approved, and then put a bunch of salutations at the end of them that weren't very flattering to their instructors, and they pulled it. And he said, and I'd like to give to the following instructors. And they said, no, and he sued and he lost because the thesis belonged to the university. So we have various types of forums. Traditional open public forum, anything goes, you know, a soapbox down in the park, parks, streets and sidewalks. You're seeing in Seattle where people are blocking traffic by lying down in the middle of the lanes and so forth, and they don't have to get permits or anything else, and the SPD is very reticent to do anything about it. And you go what we call designated public forums. Yeah. College isn't a traditional open public forum, but we've opened it up as a designated forum for your outside area. So you mentioned the courtyard, but actually the entire outside is a designated open public forum for non-students to come onto campus. They can talk about whatever they want to talk about as long as it's not commercial and not disrupting the educational environment. And then you have limited designated forums. Those are things that are for specific topics and they have less protection. And then non-public forums like somebody's office. I think there was, during the Vietnam War, they occupied the Olympic College president's office, and that was considered to be to protest, and they couldn't do that. And we're seeing this often at Evergreen in particular right now. Next one. So we just have to have reasonable restrictions based on time, place, and manner. When can you do it? Well, we say, well, college is open, 7 o'clock to 11 o'clock. Place, outside. Manner, don't disrupt the college operations. Pretty simple. Yeah, we can't discriminate based upon the content or the viewpoint of the speaker. So you'll see people out there, and there used to be some Lyndon LaRouche folks a few years back that were out there in the courtyard all the time. And they were saying that the Holocaust never occurred, and they put up signs, and it's protected speech. It's hateful speech, but it's protected speech. And all you can do is you can do counter protest, counter speech, and try to marginalize them. It's to be narrowly tailored, but it doesn't have to be the most narrowly tailored. And under the U.S. Constitution, it has to serve a significant government interest. And Washington courts have said it has to be compelling. Fortunately, they've said that the U.S. Supreme Court has said that disrupting educational classes is a compelling interest. So we're good. And you have to leave open ample alternative channels. So if you can't yell, but you can hand out pamphlets. You can talk to people one-on-one, and so forth. And this is a limited public forum is a subset. It's more narrow. You invite speakers to talk about a particular topic. They want to talk about the races, the elections coming up. It's not appropriate for someone to start talking about religion. It's a limited forum for that particular topic. Go to the next one. And it's to be viewpoint neutral and reasonable, so it's much easier to do. You can go to the next one, please. And as I mentioned earlier, we talked about people's offices, things along that line. I would think that your classrooms are probably limited public forums. If you're talking politics and you're asking for people to talk about it, they can talk about politics, and that's it. And next one. So classrooms, private offices, auditoriums, bulletin boards and kiosks. So some bulletin boards are for a particular purpose, and that's a limited forum, and you can restrict the usage with policies for that particular purpose. Some of them are wide open, anything goes. So then anyone can put whatever they want to put up on them. So it's important to have good posting policies. You can have date stamps. You can have, but they can only be up for a certain period of time. You can put size limitations on them. And those are the ways you can go ahead and battle anonymous hate speech. And of course, you've got the, we would say it's like the park, lawns, streets, and sidewalks are open game. You just can't block ingress or egress. Email system, social media. If you have a social media, it's probably going to be for a limited public forum. It's going to be related to the college. It's not going to be to talk about who has the best person for walking dogs or something along that line. So you could restrict that, but you have to be careful. We're seeing a couple of lawsuits already right now where people have been blocked from social media, and they're suing. And Trump tried to block people from his Twitter account, and he lost because they consider that to be an open public forum. So as I mentioned at the outset, when you see hateful speech on social media, the best way to handle it is to counter speech. Yearbooks have been found to be a public forum, alumni magazines and stage productions. So why do you want to restrict speech? Well, we want to control the curriculum, safety issues, architectural aesthetics. So for instance, when